Hello guys, today we have a super special guest. His name is Mark Warren, a great friend, but also a very known practitioner of lean in the community. He's very well respected. He's now retired, but he has decades of knowledge and gone through every single different industry you can imagine. He's a true living example that you can apply lean in any atmosphere. So please welcome Mark, and let's pick his brain. Today we're going to talk about the life of Taiichi Ohno and how he worked, what was he thinking, go into his brain a little bit to figure out how was it back in the days. So please welcome Mark, and hopefully you enjoy all of these golden nuggets I found out.
Great introduction. And so, I started on the shop floor. And like you said, my first commercial lean project, this is long before the term lean had been figured out. You might maybe even call it a Kaizen project, was in 78. So that kind of dates me as one of the old guys around. In some of our previous discussions, we talked about Ohno and such. And I want to try to put some corollaries out that everybody thinks of Ohno being this great genius. He started off as a young man as well, right out of technical school, went to work for the Toyota spinning group. And one of his early projects was to go and benchmark a company that had been organized for flow. It was one of their competitors. And so I can imagine him, just like anybody today, going over to Japan and going through and seeing, like a Toyota factory, trying to figure out what in the world are they doing. And so some of his interviews, he talks about the things that shocked him, that really changed how he saw work. Is like, gosh, in his spinning company, they would start trying to teach people how to retie the thread faster when the thread broke, and how they move things around in big lots and such. So he really struggled to try to learn that. And he actually practiced trying to implement flow for 10 or 15 years before they moved him to the Toyota Motor Company. And so I had a similar kind of pivot for me, even though I had been doing a lot of lean projects. About 20 years ago, I happened to be in the same town with John Shook. And of course, he was he was doing a little keynote address. And of course, after the address, everybody mobbed him. And he says, "Oh, we need to talk." So he said, "Let's do breakfast." So we started talking, and it's supposed to be kind of a short breakfast meeting that turned into a few hours of talking. We were trading war stories and such, and talking about lean and the TWI programs. And the TWI programs were really sort of a tipping point also for Ohno as well. Creating flow was a bit of a struggle. And without the TWI programs, he didn't have a toolbox to really be able to do it. And so at the end of our conversation, and I don't remember whether it was myself or John, probably John, we kind of came to the conclusion of the tens of thousands of companies that have implemented or used the TWI programs, what made Ohno different. And so about 20 years ago, I began to really dig much, much deeper and try to understand what did he do different. And that's about where my story changes. And I began to try to see what was he trying to do. And he has a chapter in the first manual that they put together where he talks about the series of experiments that he did. I mean, in other interviews and stuff, he talks about he did have a lot of resistance from his peers. But he was also quite lucky. In 1950 or 51, E.G. Toyota went and spent several months at Ford's River Rouge plant and came back realizing that Ford didn't have any magic. The time that he went, there was a halo around Ford's production system based on what Ford had done in, the Model T era. They were thinking, oh, they have some sort of secret magic sauce. And he came back and says, wait a minute, they don't have anything that we don't have or we can't buy technology-wise. Yeah, of course, they produce in a day or two what we produce in a year. And yes, they're much more efficient. For EG, there was kind of a mindset shift where it's like, instead of being a follower, he wanted to become a leader. And he says, we want to catch up. And he gave Ohno directive, catch up in 3 years. And Ohno looked, he says, well, the number of people it takes me versus a German is like 3 to 1, and the one for the German productivity to the American is another 3 to 1. So we're about 9 to 1 Toyota employees to 1 employee. He said, I caught up with their productivity in about 5 years, not 3. So he did have pressure from the top, but EG kind of was a political umbrella to shield him from the internal politics inside Toyota. And because he was successful, they moved him up, and he really forced a lot of his systems on the people, and it was called Ohno's system until it was really successful. Then it became Toyota's system. If anybody's trying to start with like a pilot line or a pilot area, it's easier to go through the learning curve to learn what works, what doesn't work, and the interactions between the systems. And so his focus was on basically production and trying to create a system. And he called it his river system. And he really struggled. I mean, this is my impression. I feel like he really struggled to explain to people what flow really was. Look at it like a river. You just want everything to run smoothly. I'm not sure that he ever saw the flow principles put out simply, but they were fairly well documented 100 years ago. The first factory that is recorded reorganized for flow in Japan is 1917, and it was a textile mill. It may have been the one that Ohno saw. There's so much information, it was just pieces of information laying around without it being connected and seen as a system, where he would push people to go out on the shop floor. Stories about him being really frustrated. And you can imagine being at it for 30 years, 40 years, and then have some young engineer right out of school. See, I'm so smart. I'm 25 years old, And so he would, some of the stories that have come out by engineers who've worked with him, it's like he would take them on the shop floor. It's like, okay, now look around. Tell me how many problems that you see. And they, stand and look for a couple of minutes. Oh, like 5 or 6. He says, oh, I can tell you 30 or 40. Yeah, because of your experience, you know that. So he draws a circle, and some of that is actually almost statistical, because the probability of you seeing enough pieces in the interaction, it takes you a while to watch it. And so, I do that when I go into a factory. I want to get out on the shop floor. There's actually kind of a feel that you get. You understand the rhythm or the lack of rhythm in the interactions between all the pieces in the production flow. And that's the other piece, being able to explain to people what flow is, where the problems to flow are. And finally he came up with, and actually originally it was 4 waste. And so the waste are actually just barriers to flow. And people miss that just by looking for the waste. So the waste is actually a symptom of things not flowing. And I look for struggles. I look for people struggling to move things, handle things, waiting on things, the frustration, like the overproduction of, some operation. A person has enough time or is fast enough, they're building up this little pile of inventory in front of the next operation. And the owner calls, oh, that's the worst waste, that overproduction. Inventory is there. People consciously build up a lot of inventory because of an unstable process, or they're not confident that the materials will be there or that they can meet the demand. So the demand is up and down and unstable. So many people, so the 3 M's, Muda is the last one. And everybody starts with the Muda or the waste. It's like, no. You basically have got the cart before the horse. Let's start from the other side. Where is the struggle? Where is the unevenness? Everybody likes the predictable. I like winning on a regular basis. But the waste piece, I'm not sure why everybody ran with that. It's the same thing on the inventory. Oh, inventory is evil. No, inventory is insurance. Where are you struggling? Where are you frustrated? So it's, can I make your job easier? That's my goal. My goal is I want to make your job easier. And you think about, if you're a coach for football, soccer, you're trying to improve the skills and the probability that your players will be successful. And so when I go out on a shop floor, I want to make your job so easy, and I want to make you so skilled, I'm guaranteeing you that you will be a success at what you're doing. That's a people side of things, but I'm trying to make the process good for the good of the people. I would say, if you take a good mechanic and you come in, yes, he's proud of his toolbox. He probably keeps it neat and organized, and he does maybe take pride in some of the tools, but his pride is the ability to do the problem solving and the skills. So from what I can see, Ohno pushed people to change their thinking or their understanding about the system or the processes. What are you doing? Sometimes I think he almost called bullshit on them. There's a story about, and you, to put this into context, from say 50 to 1960, the growth was compounded annually close to 40% year after year. They had a couple of flat years and a couple of years where they actually doubled the volume that they had to produce. Now you're in a region where you're sourcing most of your things locally if you're not building them yourself, and you can't hire enough people. You can't steal people from your suppliers because then they couldn't supply you with the parts. He was asking one of the managers, he's like, okay, we're going to have to double the volume. Well, I need, double the people, double the machines. He's like, no. I can do arithmetic. I want you to go back and think about, how are you going to do it without doubling the people, doubling the machinery? Yeah, I think he did challenge them a lot. I think today most people would consider that difficult. In his time, it was probably considered normal. There are a number of men who are my age or a little bit older that came up and went through Toyota's production system, and they talk about how the managers treated them. It's very, very tough, but also more like fatherly, that it's like, you may push your kids really hard because you want them to succeed. The person receiving the discipline may not be very happy about it, but you are growing them. 51, Ohno talked about 15 years trying to help create flow. Then he got trained on the TWI programs, job instruction, job relations, and job methods. And in that, they have a diagram they call the 5 needs of a leader. And there are 2 pieces that are the responsibility and that are supporting pieces for these supervisory skill sets. One is knowledge of the work. He absolutely required that you have to be capable and know that work well enough to be able to detail out every step, all the key points, the reasons for those key points. So he required that knowledge. But on the other side, the knowledge of the responsibilities, you had to know it's your responsibility to make sure your people are skilled properly. You've got to be able to do the problem solving. So you never moved from the supervisory to the management level until you mastered the work and then mastered the ability to actually grow people. For me today, so much stuff that people do for what they call Gemba walks, that's just industrial tourism as far as I'm concerned. Original Gemba walk was actually the manager and the supervisor. At least once a week, the manager went out with the supervisor. He wanted to understand what had he done for the week, what problems had he seen, how had he addressed it. So he's back to, I'm checking your thinking process. I'm checking your management skills. And it's the manager's responsibility if the supervisor didn't help that operator or help solve that problem. That's a weak point, and I've got to train that supervisor to do a better job teaching the people, not using the talents of the people. So in job instruction, it says, if the learner hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. So the manager is actually judging and training that supervisor to be a better person, to grow people, to improve their problem-solving skills, to improve their improving skills. And so there are 3 programs. One is the job instruction. So that's how to teach somebody. But the secret strength inside that job instruction process is the structured way of looking at the work. And, Ohno talks about, without a process, you can't have improvement. So if you cannot define how you currently do it, how in the world are you going to be able to improve? You're just guessing. I mean, we might as well put the blindfold on and the piñata up and let you go at it. The first manual that he allowed them to put together, he only had 4 waste. And so you're looking at, the process waste itself, the scrap rework, the weighting, the transportation. Everything else you have is kind of maybe subdividing some of those. Those 4 categories are really the 4 primary categories that you would see industrial engineering in a process flow. So he's looking at the process. He's trying to teach you some basic industrial engineering. Flow is a long-term objective, and flow requires that all the processes are synchronized. The work content is equally spaced. The consistency. But for a couple of years, I tried to think, stability comes first. No, structure comes first. How do I get there's the prerequisite of stability is putting the structure in. How do I put the structure in? I do it by doing the job breakdowns. That's the beginning before I get to standard work. I must start with defining how I'm currently doing the job. And every time I have like a safety problem or a quality problem or struggle with productivity, I go back and look at, how are we doing that? What's the step? How's it being done? Why is it being done that way? If you don't understand the fundamental steps, there's no way you can challenge and find the detail where it can be improved. So in putting the operations in sequence, it's like, okay, so not only do I want to know exactly where everything is, I want to have them as close together as possible. So it's like I go from this step to that step to that step, and it's easy for me to touch and handle things. And 51, all of them supervisors and managers in about a 2-year period went through all of the TWI programs. And then after that happened, the upper management says, do we know enough? Then they went through what's called MTP program, a management training program that was about 6 months long. It's like a weekend MBA. So every Saturday they spent all day, lesson after lesson after lesson, learning how to apply these things. He went through all the programs. The job methods is the improvement process, like the Kaizen. That program got absorbed probably most quickly into his system. Unfortunately, that program was only a 10-hour program, and it was like an introduction to industrial engineering with no engineering nomenclature and just kind of a superficial. Ohno needed far more than that, and that's where he brought Shingo in 1955. And Shingo began to teach some of the things on layout, on the time studies, on the methods analysis. So that was the P programs. You have to have the job instruction to actually define the original work. You use the job relations as like scientific problem solving. You can use the job methods to begin with to begin to challenge it. But standard work has multiple layers. You're doing the time study. It's a repetitive process that I can between machines. I know the exact route and placement of the operator. Basically, I can give them a dance card. Here's the steps that you do. And it doesn't matter which operator, your cycle time is the same. So I go into places, everybody says, we got standard work. And I look at it like, you're not even close. You haven't, this process is not consistent enough to get to standard work. You don't have enough data. You don't have enough background. You haven't done it enough times. There are stories of Ohno going around and looking at the job breakdowns for the supervisors, and it's like, gosh, this one's a month old. You mean you haven't found a better way in a whole month? So yeah, he did intimidate a lot of people who worked with him. As knowledgeable as he was, people were kind of fearful for having him come and look at his work. You can't learn to swim without getting wet. You can't learn to ride a bicycle unless you practice a little bit. It's the same thing of actually going to the shop floor. You actually feel the rhythm of the place and actually walk to the second through so many seconds of machine time, so many seconds of walking. How are you going to make decisions without getting all the facts? I would say he spent more time on the shop floor than he did in an office. A lot of this blame the process and not the person comes from Deming, which is accurate. I mean, it's like that, but that's one of the pieces. It's like you hold the teacher responsible for the student's performance. And if the process is not going right, the teacher's performance is based on the students. They think they're doing flow, and a pull system, and this is the bad piece, is, we finally got a Kanban system in. So now you have a defined inventory system. You're pulling. You think you've really succeeded. That's a containment step as far as Ohno was concerned. That's second place, tough guy. But the respect for people is like, is it respectful if you let a person with talent just waste their talent? You want the system to perform at peak performance. I mean, if you go into sports, everybody likes a winning team. Everybody looks like, oh, wow. They look at that performance. What they don't see is how many hours of practice. You don't know the thousands of practice times that I have just to perfect this. I don't want people to think about it being so complex or so hard that it takes forever to learn it. I guess the way I would picture it is, one, he wants you to lay out all the facts. The hard piece is like, okay, picking out which piece is actually causing the disruption to flow. And it's usually some key point. It's in a step, and then inside that step, it's almost always a key point. If you have a safety incident, you can go, okay, at what step did that safety incident happen? What key point did they not follow? Then you look into job breakdown. Is it not in there? Oops. Did we forget to teach the person? Did we not explain why it's so useful? There's kind of progression to standard work. So when you started school, what's the first thing you learned to do in math? Addition, probably, then subtraction, then multiplication, division, fractions, that sort of thing. We don't go in and start calculus to start with. So a standard is like the calculus level. There is a sequence step of defining the processes, makes you think about, how am I doing this work? What's important from a safety perspective, from a quality perspective? What's important that makes the job easier? Toyota standard work has 3 forms you have to fill out. Part of that, one of those forms is partially taking the data from the job breakdown, but it's also a time measurement, a layout. It's defining where all the safety pieces are. It defines where all the quality pieces are. So, and it looks at a capacity, and it looks at the capacity of how this process integrates with the upstream and downstream as well. And it looks at the amount of inventory that you're going to have. So you're defining exactly how many pieces work in process that you have in that work cell at the time. Companies don't do standard work. Generally, they have an engineering standard, this encyclopedia that they want you to read if you're in some of the critical industries, but they don't have standard work. I'm sorry. So I worked with a company similar to the one that you were in. I was over in Paris, and we were talking about doing the job breakdowns on how to do things. Oh, we've got all the standards. Yeah, where are they? Oh, they're over in that cabinet that had doors on it, closed. Just a couple of, big cabinets, just stacks and stacks of 3-inch binders. So how often do you go in there? Oh, we know it all by heart, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. But when we start doing a job breakdown, it begins to come out. It's like, oh man, that is a hard way of doing it. It's the very just visually bringing it out from most people. And he would think, oh, you're really not doing, your system is just not there. So after he left Toyota, a lot of people aren't aware of this. A couple of the guys he'd worked with, they set up a small company, and then they got together with a number of other companies, and they started what's called the new production system. And there's about 30 something companies that joined. So they had to put some money up, and the consultants would come in, and they were pretty ruthless about how they forced them to, tighten up their ship. But some of the companies that joined were on the verge of bankruptcy, and he turned the companies around and such. What he did with those doesn't match most of what people consider to be lean. And I can say a story of one of Shingo's early trips over into the U.S. A manager was very proud of all the data and the charts that they had up on a wall, and was showing Shingo all the quality controls and how they were, tracking all their quality issues and stuff. And they said, Shingo looked at it like, yeah, obituaries. What looks lean and what really is efficient and effective is two different things. And Ohno was looking at reducing the number of people it took to actually make the product. It's like our goal is to create value. We create value by the transformation step by step. How can I do that most efficiently? I'm not trying to make people work faster, harder, sweat them out. I'm trying to make the process more efficient. That's a silly question. I would almost say, let's do the first 3 S's, but I'm not going to do them like everybody does 3S. I want you to pick out your 3 biggest value streams. And if you're a low volume, high mix operation, kind of like product families, walk those. And you need to understand the flows. First S is sorting. So I want to tell you, let's pick out your, at least say 80% of your volume. And let's find out what the value stream is. At every workstation, think of it like a race car. We want to just remove everything that's not to those value streams. A lot of people are going to resist removing things, but you can remove it and say, okay, just in case I'm going to need it, I'm going to put it over a little bit out of the way or in a storage place. Once you've stripped it down, all of a sudden you've got a lot of space. Then I want you to organize what's left, organize around that work of those, say, major value streams. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the value-added sequences as close together as possible. When I get them close together, I can synchronize them. I can hand it off to the next one and hand it off. After you remove the clutter, you organize it for effectiveness, which also may mean moving some of those operations. I want to begin to try to get some standards in there. Kind of the cleaning is like, okay, I want to make sure all the stuff is maintained and such. Basically, I want to say everything is in working order. So if you do that, just walking the flows and looking where the struggles are, you're going to find lots of opportunities. First S is like, you have to know what is really needed at each workstation to the level. You can't do good 3S'ing if you don't understand your processes. I want you to be aware of what work is really done at each station. I want the supervisor and then the person at each workstation to explain to me, use that. Yeah. What? What's the value in it? Tell me, a job breakdown on the critical pieces to help us, basically surface what's important. So if you think about the very first step is making sure the processes are in sequence. And then I want to have them as close together as possible. So I can actually do the second principle is the synchronization step of synchronizing the processes. So I won't build up inventory in between. I won't overload another operation. It really brings out where your struggles are. Actually, I think I would want them to read Ohno's original manual, because half of the manual talks a little bit about a couple of the tools. The other half talks about his mindset, about his approach. And then I would say the other piece is begin to try to learn how to do job breakdowns. By thinking about how you do the work, it actually changes how you think about work. I mean, even Shingo talks about this. He had kind of an epiphany in the late 30s where he went through a program where for several weeks, where he learned Gilbreth's methodology and about third legs and such. And he called it the motion mind. And he credits Gilbreth as being the person who really changed how he thought about work. Both guys had just basically a moment where they realized, I'm not thinking about work in the way it ought to be thought about. For all the magic we put around the name, you can do it too. It's not that magical. A lot of it's just common sense, just a practical solutions for solving practical problems. Just don't think there has to be any magic with it.
Just get your hands dirty, right?
Yep, get your hands dirty. Go out there and do it. I mean, it's like if you want to learn how to swim, you're going to have to get wet.